Today I'm going to talk about how it isn't certainty that's responsible for atrocities. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. So this video was sort of motivated by something I had seen. Jordan Peterson was talking to Jonathan Pageau and had described a discussion he had with Sam Harris. And he had said that Sam Harris identifies the religious impulse with totalitarian certainty of the sort that was responsible for so many atrocities in the 20th century. And it was kind of funny because Jordan said, I'm afraid it's not a very differentiated analysis, but at least I understand what it is you're saying now. Because he talked about his failure to really communicate well with Sam on previous occasions. Anyway, this isn't really about that, but about that whole spirit of totalitarian certainty that's responsible for atrocities. Because you see this sort of thing all over the place. It's especially popular with boomers, I think, but by no means unique to them at all. This idea that it's people who really believe in something who are the dangerous ones. I remember Billy Joel's song. I can't remember the title of the song. I haven't listened to it for more than a decade. But there's this lyric in it about, and the only people I fear are those that never have doubt. And so you see this, it's the people who have principles, they carry this through and kill enormous numbers of people because principles are really dangerous and so on. And yeah, this is wrong for two real reasons. The first of which is that the people who actually say this are quite certain of a great many things and don't have the sort of doubt that they're espousing or saying, is what prevents there from being atrocities. So, that's the first thing. This doesn't apply to anyone. Least of all does it apply to the sort of people who are saying that everybody, don't take your beliefs too far. You need to have some doubt about everything. Don't be too certain. So first off, this doesn't even apply to them. And second, it is not doubt that is what prevents atrocities. It is not certainty that is what causes atrocities. So I'm going to talk about these two things separately, but in the first case, it's really easy to see. Take Sam Harris, for example. I don't know much about the fellow. I have a video actually years ago I did a video talking about Sam's attempt to create a scientific morality. And as I said, I really did appreciate that he was trying to be slightly rigorous about this, to the point where he did actually begin it with stating what his assumptions are. And that was a really good practice. Not nearly enough people do that, and it's a pity that they don't do that. The problem was the things that he was assuming in the beginning were his conclusion. I'm not going to get into it now. Basically, he just said, the only thing I'm asking you to give me is that a world of maximal suffering is worse than a world of maximal happiness. And as I explained in the video, even if you were to give him that, it wouldn't actually get you to where you want to go. But he's straight up assuming a moral value system and saying, I can derive a moral value system if you start by giving me a moral value system. And it's well, that's not really very much of an accomplishment, is it? Saying I can, just from bare facts and using science, come up with a moral system, where we can tell that, some actions are better than others, as long as you give me at the outset that some things are better than others, some specific things are better than others. So you're saying if you already assume a value system, you can work one out. Not very impressive. He's not a genius by any means. Personable, and good looking and stuff, but a genius he most certainly is not. Somebody who actually has thought through what he was saying, at least at the time. I haven't kept up with him over the years. He definitely is not. But I've seen enough of him to know that he certainly is certain about a great many things. Because just run this thought experiment. Ask him, how much doubt do you have over whether or not slavery should be illegal? Consider, is it enough doubt that, you wouldn't take part in, say, a war to end slavery? That, let's not take this whole anti-slavery, I'm against slavery, but let's not take this anti-slavery thing too far, and he's going to have a lot of positions like that, like genocide, right? Do you have enough doubts that you won't really act on your belief that genocide is bad? So you won't take part in a war to stop the Nazis with their death camps? Because, I don't want to run an extermination camp, but, if the German, if the National Socialist German Workers' Party is running extermination camps, can I really say that they're wrong? I mean, I think they're wrong. That's my intuition. I definitely wouldn't do it myself, but, to actually go and kill people in order to stop this, let's not take things too far. Does anyone think Sam Harris would say that? Does anyone think that on every subject he simply will not actually do it? And okay, to be fair, he could be that sort of utterly useless person who won't actually do anything, who in an age that was less technologically sophisticated, where you needed people to actually accomplish things, like practical things where you had to like make decisions like, am I going to kill this wolf or not? Am I going to fight those people or not? Like, which of us is, they're coming here to enslave us. Like, which of us is, am I going to be enslaved? Are they going to die? Like, back in the days, which is most of history, when you needed people like that so that you could stay like free and alive and whatnot, he was one of those useless people who would just, be the serf supporting the person who would actually make the useful decisions. Maybe he is like that. Okay, I mean, maybe he is so completely useless that only in a society where everything is taken care of for him and he doesn't need to actually be useful in any sort of real decision can he survive. So maybe. But I kind of don't buy it, really. And I especially don't buy that he thinks of himself that way. And I also don't buy that he refuses to endorse any politicians or any decisions, because after all, like, I believe that we should have taxation, but, let's not push it so far as, like, actually doing it, right? Like, putting an idea into practice, that's taking it pretty seriously, right? That's an irrevocable decision to like, do something. You can't undo it. You can change it later, but you can't undo it. You can't go back in time. So, like, let's not take things too far here. Do we really believe that Sam Harris has, like, no positions? And I know he had, like, positions on COVID and lockdowns and stuff. So, like, more than just like, maybe this would be a good idea, but, let's not take things too seriously here. No one like this is like that about everything, because you would simply sit around doing absolutely nothing. These people act. To act is to say that, like, this thing, I'm taking this seriously enough to actually go and do something. They take lots of things seriously enough to go and do them. What they really mean, if you actually, like, sort of, if you cut to the chase, right? Like, if you think it through, and it takes a long time, but, like, if you actually think it through, and I don't want to take all that time right here, what it actually amounts to, what they always actually are saying is, when you, person who is not me, has some sort of belief that means that you disapprove of something that I'm doing, or you think you should stop me from doing the thing I want to do, you should be paralyzed by doubt about those things. When it comes to anything where you're helping me, forget that. All things in moderation. Don't take that doubt thing too seriously. Be certain enough that action is good to actually do help me. And about anything that I want to do, let's not take this whole, like, you should doubt stuff and not be too certain thing all that seriously. It's got its place in its time, but, like, right now, I want to do the thing I want to do, so, my belief that I should do this, let's not get carried away here. I'm just gonna, go for it. They're two. This is just a person basically being two, saying, like, I wish that everybody would agree with me. And, like, yeah, no kidding. We all kind of on some level wish that everybody would just let us do whatever we want and, not take anything seriously enough to get in our way when they would, what they think is right would contradict what we want to do. But, like, you're supposed to become 3 and figure out things like compromise. Or maybe it's 4 or 5. I mean, my kids are a bit older. My 6-year-old has the concept of compromise. So, like, at some point, before you hit, say, 10, you kind of come up with the idea of, like, okay, like, people have their things that they want to do and we have to, like, work together, and I don't get everything I want. Like, that's kind of something you're supposed to figure out long before you get out of childhood. And, like, what these people have done is they've come up with a fancy way of saying, basically, I want what I want and everyone should just give me whatever I want. That's largely what these people actually mean when they say this, because they only ever bring it up as a way of trying to get people who they can't talk out of their position to just, like, give it up anyhow. That's the only time they ever actually bring this stuff up, other than, like, as a general vague, they bring it up as a general vague sort of thing occasionally. But, like, the thing that always stimulates it is always that. It's always that they can't actually argue people into changing their behavior, so they just want to try to like paralyze them with indecision instead of persuading them to some new course of action. That's what it always freaking is. I'm sorry, there's an exception to that. It is also sometimes a psychological defense on their own part. Other people did bad things, and I don't want to do those things. So it must have been something that made them do it. Because, like, I would never do that because, like, I don't have the right sort of beliefs that would force me into doing that thing. And they never know enough about what the people did, and it's just a psychological defense to pretend that, like, they'll never be tempted. And they don't have enough imagination to realize that what happened is other people were in different circumstances. They weren't, like the Nazis were not, the Nazis didn't feel a deep-seated love of the Jews that they overcame, that was overcome by their belief system, such that they were forced into this conclusion that they needed to run extermination camps, even though really they hated running extermination camps. They would never want to run extermination camps. If you learn some actual freaking history, they were thieves who desperately wanted to steal. There's history, there's backstory. Like, they blame the Jews for various problems having to do with things like food shortages during the Weimar Republic and other stuff. And there's a whole history of like Hitler and communist uprisings that involve some Jewish leaders. It's a complicated history, right, that led to this situation. And I'm oversimplifying it intentionally, but not in a way. I'm oversimplifying it in a way that doesn't change the point that I'm making at the moment. So I'm not describing history in its totality. I'm just describing the part relevant to my point. It was not the case that Hitler and the other National Socialist members of the National Socialist German Workers' Party really liked the Jews, but unfortunately, like, their belief system simply dictated that, like, they had to run extermination camps. And so, despite the fact that they didn't want to, well, in order to actually be good National Socialists, they just had to go and do this thing, even though it was so much what they didn't want to do. No, that's not what happened at all. That's so freaking stupid, in fact. Like, if you learn history, these were a bunch of thieves who were desperate to hold on to power and placate the German people. And so they were trying to steal from everyone around. It was much easier to steal from the Jews than other people. But they stole from plenty of, they stole from the French and the Romanians and the Polish and the Ukrainians and on and on. They stole from everyone around. They tried to disguise their thievery in a lot of cases. There's a fascinating book, Hitler's Beneficiaries, that describes a bunch of the particulars of how they stole, where they like paid in pretend money that they then essentially, so they, like, it looked like they were paying, like soldiers were paying for goods and services, but like then the money to actually redeem this like fake money that they were issuing actually came from the country itself, that they forced the government of the country that they were running to give to them, essentially. It's more complicated, not getting into the details. Details aren't the point. Anyway, there are a bunch of thieves who got desperate, and they got more and more desperate, and they progressively stole from the Jews in various ways until eventually it's like, well, we need everything they have, and what are we going to do with them if they take everything from them? I mean, like, we even want to like steal their clothing, so what are we going to do with a bunch of naked people that we don't want to feed? Well, there's the easy way out, which is if they're not alive anymore, they're not our problem. And it really is a series of temptations like that, where these thieves who are desperate to stay in power, and who had Hitler had his crazy racial theories about how the Jews couldn't form societies, and so they were a threat to, etc. He had his crazy ideas, to be sure, that made this all easier. But, like, he started off with the idea of like, just moving them out of the way, and like, forcing, getting the Jews to leave and stealing their stuff as they left, not allowing them to, like, take a lot of their property out of Germany. It was only much later that like, the idea of exterminating them came about, because, like, the various types of theft had gotten to that point where this was the like, level of thievery they wanted to get to. The point being, they were not forced into this against their will by a principle that they held to more dearly than they did to their things like, their instinctual love for their fellow human beings. They were thieves who were tempted by an easy means to get away with their thievery, by murder, And so they did murder to get away with their thievery. And this actually brings me, by the way, to my second point, that it is not doubt that prevents people from committing atrocities. It's actually doubt, really, that lets people commit atrocities. Specifically, it's doubt that what they're doing is really wrong. Because, and this kind of relates to the way I said, like, the stuff people don't doubt, but, like, let's suppose you're tempted to kill people. Like, you want to steal their stuff, and the people still being around afterwards is a real problem. So it's a big head scratcher. So you scratch your head, and you scratch your head, different places, and you really do a lot of hard thinking. Like, you know what? If they were dead, then I could steal their stuff, and there wouldn't be any problems. But yeah, you know, like, that is murder, and murder's wrong. Well, I mean, is it always wrong? You know, I realize that there's a principle against murder, right? You know, it's one of the 10 commandments. If you're going to take that seriously, you know, thou shalt not murder. Yeah, I mean, you know, but still, you know, everything in moderation, right? Like, let's not go overboard. There are complicating factors here. There are other circumstances that the simplistic thing doesn't take into account. Like, let's not leap to conclusions. That's how you give into temptation and do the terrible thing that you want to do because you're in circumstances that make this thing desirable, make it look like a good idea. And yeah, in different circumstances it doesn't look like a good idea, but you're not in those different circumstances. And other people, 50 years later, who are richer and happier and don't have any of your problems, even if maybe you shouldn't have these problems yourself, because, like, you shouldn't be a socialist in doing this crap. But in any event, they're not in the moment. They don't see the world from your eyes. And so, yeah, this doesn't look very tempting to those other people. But to you, in the moment, you've made a series of bad decisions up till this point, and trying to figure out, like, how do I deal with the consequences of all of the bad decisions combined with the state of the world? Well, you get tempted to do even worse stuff, because that's, like, how sin actually goes. It's like when you do bad things, in order to try to deal with that and not have to essentially pay the penalty for what you did wrong, in order to not have to perform restitution for your screw-ups, you have to screw up even further. You have to do even worse stuff in order to not pay the penalty for what you've done so far. So if you want to keep on going on thieving over and over again, well, eventually you have to come to something worse than thievery to keep the thievery up indefinitely. And if you never want to get out of the thievery by giving stuff back, well, guess what? It gets worse from here. That's the nature of sin. If you will not turn away from sin, the path of sin leads to bad places. This is kind of a side note, but a general explanation for the psychology of the fallen human race is everyone wants to be able to jump off a cliff, fall halfway down, and say, I really like it right here. Let's just stop here. Like, you know, it's a lot of work being up on the ground and holding yourself up. This feeling of free floating, it's really nice. I don't like where this is going, though. I don't want to slam into the ground down there. This would be a good place to be. And, like, yeah, in some sense it would be, but it doesn't work that way. Like, you either grab onto the cliff and it's painful and hard and you have to climb your way back up to virtue. Detail mostly through God's power, you know, not your own. Anyway. But nonetheless, like, it's going to be painful and hurt to get back up to the cliff where it's safe, to the top of the cliff where it's safe, while you still can. And your current trajectory is pretty bad, even though it seems kind of nice at the moment. And as long as you don't look down, the fact that the ground is rapidly approaching at you, you can ignore it for a bit longer. But, like, yeah, that's what sin does. It always gets worse from here because you're heading in the wrong direction. And the more you go in the wrong direction, the further away you get from where you should be. It's just the nature of things. Well, you know. So that's the thing. If you keep on doing bad things, you're going to be going to worse places. And you're going to be tempted to worse and worse things as you get to these worse and worse places. At which point, you might be saved by the complete certainty that this is wrong. Like, if your two choices are, well, I either have to repent at this point, or I have to do murder. Well, if you know with dumb certainty, no question, murder is wrong, this is a line I cannot cross. I simply may not do this thing. Screw doubts, screw philosophical uncertainty. I know this is actually wrong. You may actually stop. A lot of people don't. A lot of people just keep on going. A lot of people do actually stop, by the way. I mean, if you look into stuff, like a lot of people aren't willing to go all the way, and that's one reason why they get caught. You know, they won't go all the way into full evil, and so they kind of hold there, and they don't repent either, but they like try to stay where they are without crossing that line because they're unwilling to cross the line because they don't have enough doubt about the fact that this is in fact a line to just step over it. And yeah, as a result, dithering there, they get caught, etc. So like you see that happen a bunch. Another thing, by the way, a side note, if you want to look at this sort of thing portrayed in movies, the one place I really know it done well is, of all the strange places, the third Star Wars prequel, Revenge of the Sith. The Fall of Anakin Skywalker. To some degree, you need to know some of what's in the previous one, too. I can't remember the name of the middle of the prequels. Phantom Menace, something or other, Revenge of the Sith, I think it goes. And anyway, whatever. The second one you need to know some of, and the third one especially. Because if you look at how Anakin Skywalker falls, he's not just like straight out tempted to do something evil. What Palpatine actually does is set him up in a morally ambiguous position. I think I've done a video about this in detail, so I'm going to keep it brief. Sets him up in a morally ambiguous position, then convinces him that he already crossed the line when he hadn't. Once Anakin believes he had crossed the line, now he can just keep on going. Once he believes that line has already been crossed, he would not have been willing to cross that line into like outright rebellion against the Jedi. But in defending, in the moment when Mace Windu is like trying to strike Palpatine down without having convinced Anakin that this is the right action to do, and Anakin went and defended he defended Palpatine against Mace Windu, but not in a way that like killed Windu, and it was actually Windu did die sort of as a result, but not directly by Anakin, like not through Anakin's moral fault. And Anakin was simply defending Palpatine for the moment against what looked to be either a precipitous execution or murder, depending. He wasn't sure. Palpatine then spun it, though. Once Windu was dead, Palpatine spun it as Anakin had murdered Mace Windu. Anakin killed him in a morally culpable way. And so Anakin was already on the dark side. And then Anakin believing Palpatine's interpretation of what happened meant that he had not actually crossed the line yet, but believing that he could now easily cross the line, because in his mind he was just doing more of what he'd already done. He was already on the wrong side of this line, so at this point, what more does he have to lose? Very psychologically accurate to how people actually make really, really terrible decisions. It's usually they sort of like toe the line in the sense of TOE the line, like your toes are right up against the line, and then convince themselves that they've crossed it before they actually have, at which point they now psychologically are more capable of doing it. And the relationship to this is specifically like when you have that sort of firm belief in the line and that this is a hard line and a hard and fast line, you have to use psychological tricks like that to cross it. Or you can use doubt. You can say, yeah, is it really so bad? I mean, really, like, am I sure that it's bad? Like, I know I was brought up thinking that it was bad, but, like, never really, like, saw the explanation for it, and it's a complicated circumstance. And the moment you can do that, the moment you can start to weasel around this and blur the line, the much easier it becomes to cross it. It is literally, if you know anything about human beings, philosophical doubt about what's morally right that allows a person to psychologically cross those moral lines they know to be a line they should not cross. Because if you blur the line, now you can really convince yourself that you're not actually crossing it when you are. You know, like, really the line's a bit further on. I'm beyond, that hard and fast line that those, like, stick in the mud, stickler for rules people say the line's right here. But it's really a very blurry line. It's really over here on that portion of the line that's the problem. And yeah, I've crossed what they say is bad, but I'm not all the way to the really bad stuff. Well, actually, you are. I mean, you've crossed the moral line. You've done something evil that you knew was evil. Anyway, like, yeah, you go directly to hell. Do not collect $200. To paraphrase the Monopoly metaphor. Good thing salvation. It's always possible to repent. Anyway, that's a digression. The point being, it is exactly philosophical doubt of that wishy-washy kind that allows people to commit atrocities. It is exactly certainty in the moral rules that may prevent a person from crossing those lines into atrocities. Now, I mean, it is true that, like, if a person grows up believing that, like, something isn't evil, so, like, they grew up believing that owning slaves is perfectly fine and a completely morally permissible thing, and maltreating them is just utterly normal, then, like, yeah, they will do that, but everyone does what they grew up being used to. That's not very interesting, and nobody has, and especially not the people who profess philosophical doubts, ever have philosophical doubts about all the stuff they took for granted growing up. I mean, just meet the people, talk to them for a little bit, and they all assume that what they learned growing up is normal. I mean, to some degree, it's more like what they learned when they were, like, early teenagers, really, as normal, is, like, obviously blindingly true and unquestionable, and just so obvious there's no point in thinking about it or anything. It is exactly when people hold on to philosophical certainties that it makes them question things like what they grew up with, and is this stuff really right, and how can I reconcile this to other things I know to be true? And maybe you can, and maybe you can't, but it's exactly having dogmas that are not negotiable, in which you are certain, that makes you think. As long as everything's wishy-washy, you can go by feelings the entire time. And it is precisely these people who don't do any thinking, who just go by feelings, who talk about the importance of, how it's so dangerous to like, believe in things firmly. You need to always have a little bit of doubt. And, like, I mean, it's not surprising. Like, they don't want to think. They're terrified of thinking. They know if they start thinking, they're going to find out that, like, they've been doing stuff wrong and they're going to have to amend their lives. So they desperately, desperately want to not think, and they really, really want you to not make them think. So, I mean, that's really what's going on in terms of, like, why are they pushing this stuff? It's that. That's not why it's wrong. It's wrong for the reasons I described before. But once you explain why it's wrong, there's the question of, like, why do people push this thing that's so obviously wrong? It's obvious once you, it's not like obvious if you're 5. It's like obvious once you do a whole bunch of research into, like, how have people committed atrocities and what did they believe and what were their circumstances and what are human beings like and how do people go about giving into temptation, how do people go about resisting temptation and so on. Once you do a whole lot of studying and get your anthropology straight, in the sense of anthropos and logos, not the academic study anthropology, but, like, anthropology in that sense of, like, what is the nature of human beings, then, yeah, it's really obviously wrong. And I just add on, like, why do people push it, even though it's obviously wrong, if you know a fair amount about history and human beings and so on. And that's why they push it. Knowing why they're pushing it will help you to deal with them, because the very fact that they do not want to think is why they're saying it. And so if you try to make them think, you're trying to force them to do exactly the thing they don't want to do. And so you're going about opposing them in the way where you will get maximal resistance. Unfortunately, I do not know what way to go about doing this where you won't get maximal resistance. I haven't found that one out yet. I'm still working on that. If somebody's so far gone that they will tell you need to have doubt about everything, the only people I fear are the people who never have doubts, etc. Yeah, I don't know. Question the people who have healthy doubts about whether or not mercy is appropriate. Anyway, yeah. So this is one doing a lot of studying. I have figured out how to identify the problem, and I'm pretty confident in why you hear this nonsense. I have yet to find out how you help these people. But I hope this helps in seeing through it and seeing why it comes, and at least helping to deal somewhat better that way. And if anyone knows a way to get through to these people, a way to actually help them, and please let me know, because I would love to be able to do that. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.